Yeah, for sure. Where did the concept of work come from, and why is it often so difficult?
I think in our normal, just conversational way of talking about work, we often put it in the context of our occupation. And a lot of what I was trying to say in the book of Grace at Work is to remind people that our work is our vocation, right? So our occupation is what occupies us. And our vocation, the history of that word actually is, it's our calling. As we establish, evaluate before the Lord, what are our gifts, what are our talents, what are our interests, and how can we best apply them, not just to personal fulfillment, but to bringing glory to God. And that's why our work is our vocation, which means, of course, our occupation is included in our vocation, but our vocation also includes the way we care for our families, the way that we care for ourselves, the way that we honor God wherever we are. All that is part of our vocation. And that means God has called us to it, to evaluate what he's given and then using it as best we're able to bring glory to him. And even that has to be defined of it, to fulfill his purposes. Because people might say, well, I don't play a trumpet. I don't know how I'm going to bring glory to God. But no, if you said, how can you use what God has given you to fulfill his purposes in or for your life? That is your vocation. And that's an important difference, because the reality is lots of us do jobs that are not fun. They may be repetitive, mundane, maybe even mind numbing. But if I'm thinking, what purposes of God might I fulfill by this? Then that's giving me a different perspective on what I'm doing.
Yeah. On a similar note, for many people, their job is just the thing that they do to pay the bills. But tell us how, as Christians, we can be missing the bigger picture if we treat our jobs like that, Bryan.
Well, that's an important question. And of course, it's one that my people ask, and I was trying to answer. I think the average Christian rightly thinks about, how am I supposed to take my faith into the workplace in very simple terms. Well, I know what I'm supposed to do if I'm a Christian. I shouldn't lie or cheat or steal, and probably try to witness during the lunch break if the boss will let me. Now, those are not wrong things, but it hardly touches the surface, I think, of understanding what God has called us to do. Because if what I'm doing is I'm, the words of the Apostle Paul, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God, then I'm understanding that my gifts, my opportunities, the position I have in the world is where God has placed me to advance his kingdom. Now, that may sound strange if you're doing something that seems not real significant in the eyes of the world. I tell the account in the book of going to the Western United States here, and where a lot of cheese is manufactured in the United States. And I went to kind of a tour of one of the cheese making companies, a factory. And I watched a man on the assembly line, and he stood in position for hours watching little blocks of cheese going past him. And every now and then he would adjust one so that it would properly fit in the packaging that was at the end of the conveyor belt. And I thought to myself, I am sure glad I don't have that job. That seems to be so. Now, I have no idea what the man's family is like, what his intellect is, what his enjoyments are. But I had to think, if he were not doing that job and not doing it well, what would be the consequence? I mean, if he is not arranging that little brick of cheese so that it properly fits in the package, then the packaging doesn't properly seal, which means that bacteria forms on the cheese, which means it becomes deadly to whatever person or family is affected down the road, which means if somebody's made sick, then the company can't function and the employees do not make their salaries. And of course, if people are damaged and who eat the cheese, then they can't make money for their families. And there's by somebody doing their job well with the end purpose in mind, not only do they find fulfillment, they understand how they are fulfilling God's purpose. And I know it's a little bit silly. Do people where you are, do they still at Christmas time watch the old movie, It's a Wonderful Life? Do people watch that? Does that make sense? Now this is not going to sound very spiritual at all, but when George Bailey, gets the opportunity by Clarence the Angel, who's trying to earn his wings. I'm not defending the theology of this. George Bailey gets the opportunity to see what life would have been like had he not lived.
Yeah.
And some of what I encourage people to do who are doing things they don't find fun or even meaningful to say, well, apply the George Bailey test. If you were not doing it, if you were not doing it well, what would be the consequence? So the man arranging cheese bricks on the conveyor belt, well, the consequence was his company could not function if he does not do his job well. And he cannot provide for his family. And other families cannot be provided for. And the health of the community is affected. And the income of the... Well, I know it's a little bit like, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, a horse was... It's kind of playing that game again. But it's real. And it's presuming that God knows what he's doing in this world. And he has given us gifts and opportunities to fulfill his purposes. So, in the book, I quote the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, and he simply says this: to lift up hands in prayer gives God glory, but a man with a dung fork in his hand or a woman with a slop pail gives him glory too. God is so great that all things give him glory if you mean that they should. Now, I like that. If I mean by doing this that I'm fulfilling God's purposes for my life, then I'm bringing God glory by what I do. And some of that may be because I'm sacrificing for the sake of my family. I'm sacrificing my interest or joy or whatever for the sake of my community. But that theology of the cross actually brings glory to God if I'm actually perceiving that what I'm doing is bringing glory. So, the woman with the slop bucket, she's feeding the pigs, but if she didn't feed the pigs die. Pigs die, farmer doesn't live, people can't eat, town doesn't survive. If we mean it for God's purposes, then our work is actually worship. It's actually bringing God glory by seeing the ends for which he has created us, gifted us, and placed us in the world in which we're working.
Yeah. I can imagine that's going to be really encouraging for a lot of people to hear that, Bryan. So thank you.